Jackson with a career spanning 6 decades. Big round of applause. I'd like to introduce Mick Jackson. Please join us. Woo. Here we go. This is for you, Mick. I got this one right here for you.
Hello.
There you go. Come on up, take a seat.
Hi.
I gotta say, there's no better way to come to a screening of LA Story than to get stuck in traffic on the way here. I feel like that's kind of, isn't it perfect? So how did it feel to watch this film 33 years later?
Wow. 33 years and 35mm too. I haven't seen it for a while on the big screen. It looked lovely, this print.
Yeah, good job.
Thank you. I don't know. It's very strange watching it after all this time. It didn't do terribly good business. It did about 28 million when it came out, and people thought it just was kind of disappeared into nowhere. But actually, you're here, you're watching it. It's still around.
I don't know if this is the same for anyone. This was
I
like,
thought I actually heard a couple of giggles and snickers in it. Did you actually find
Yeah.
it funny after all this time?
I think a lot of the little LA-isms still hold true today. There's probably a few new ones, but I don't know if this was the same for anybody, but this was like a family favorite movie for me. We had it on VHS and we would watch it all the time. Is this the same for anybody?
It's very strange. It's very much of its time. Looking at it, I think it's, to use a Tolkienism, it's from an earlier age of the world. You know, the reason why people come back to it, I think, is that there isn't a mean bone in this movie's body. It's very unhating, it's unjudgmental, it's, well, everything we hoped it would be. It's a gentle film. It has grace and charm, I hope. And I hope that works still.
No, I think it does for sure. Right?
I think the LA Times Gold Derby thing rated the best films set in LA, best 15. Worst to best, it came in at number 6. Now, I can't figure out whether it's 6 from the end or 6 from the beginning, but somewhere in the middle is good.
For sure. Do you remember your first trip to Los Angeles? Coming
I do.
from England, what was that first trip to Los Angeles like?
It was a kind of vacation with my wife, a driving location, and we came down from San Francisco to LA, expecting to find LA, and we drove through it and out the other side via Beverly Hills. And we said, is that it? Was that it? It's a bit like the scene in the movie where they're in Lidio, the restaurant, and he says, wow, I'm done already. I don't remember eating. We didn't remember LA. There was something struck me at the time. There was no center to it, I thought at the time, until I made this film and until I was seduced into making this film by Steve.
Well, that's a great transition. My next question was to ask you about how did the project come about?
I'd done a few films in British television, which won some BAFTAs, and therefore, when they got shown here, I became a name that was kind of familiar. And then I got a call from Steve Martin's producer, and he said, we'd like to offer you LA Story. You know, people don't always make the right decision in their life. I can't imagine why I said this, but I read the script and I thought, this is amazing, this is beautiful. So I rang him back and said, I don't think I could do this. I'm not from LA, I don't know LA, I don't know anything about it, and this film is just such a perfect work of art. Everything in it is just beautiful. I don't think I could do it justice. And he was kind of taken aback for a bit. I didn't realize the kind of bubble I worked in British television, in the BBC, you don't think Hollywood. So when someone calls you up and says, Steve Martin wants you to do his next movie, you don't say, ah, no. Anyway, he said, we really want you to do this. We'd like you to come over to LA and just meet with Steve and see how you get on. And what Steve told me, which should have been obvious to anybody but a dumb cop like me, is they wanted someone who didn't know anything about LA. They wanted someone with a fresh pair of eyes. And Steve very kindly took me around in his car. We drove around for days in his car, playing music, and this might work for this scene and so on. And that's the origin of the scene in the movie where they do, he and Sarah do a tour of LA. You know, this is a 2-door house, this is a 4-door house. So he drove me past various landmarks, particularly the area around Century City at night. And he said, this is what LA is to me. Look at all these houses. They're on identical lots. They're on identical plans. Here's a Scottish castle. Here's a Normandy farmhouses. Everybody makes their own LA. And I realized that what they wanted was someone who would bring an outside sensibility. I'm a European, I'm a British, which you probably tell from my impenetrable accent. Maybe they'll have a fresh take on LA. So I said yes. And what I tried to do with this movie was to bring a European sensibility, the complete opposite of Starsky and Hutch and anything like that, blazing sunlight overhead midday. Because I realized that the light here in LA, particularly in the evening, through the trees and the palm trees, is so wonderful. It's like an impressionist painting. So for the brunch scene, the cameraman, Andrew Dunn, brilliant cinematographer, put camouflage nets over the set so it would be dappled, and had Dior silk stockings sent in from Paris and put over the lens. And we shot it so that in that scene where he touches Sarah for the first time, the touch, as it were, it should look like something European. The music is, the whole movie, I wanted to give a kind of European sensibility in sense of, these are people doing silly things, but they don't care. There's a kind of nonchalance, insouciance, use another French word about it. They're in this blissful state of accepting themselves for the silly things they do. I'm from the kind of culture that nurtured Monty Python's Flying Circus, so I'm used to silliness in a kind of sense of being holy or blessed. And so I really tried to bring that and this French music that has wonderful, calm quality to it, like Charles Trenet, La Mer, and Django Reinhardt and the Hot Club of France and Stefan Grappelli. It's kind of alien to LA, and yet somehow this bringing a different culture to bear on it, as if it were worth that effort, I think pays off. I think it has a kind of charm to it.
Yeah, definitely.
And LA Story has entered as a phrase, has entered the culture, I think. I passed a billboard on the way here, an illustrated billboard. It's for somebody, we speak your language. And it was almost the poster of LA Story, a red sky and sunset and the silhouetted palm trees. It didn't say LA Story, but the image said LA Story.
Well, I hope it doesn't make you change your life. It seems like things are pretty steady right now.
I've been here for 30 odd years and I just love it.
So what does that transition from, that you were initially recruited to the project for your outsider perspective, but now you're, proper Angelino. Has your perception of the city changed at all?
I still like being here. As I said, it seems to come from a different age. And while we were shooting LA Story, I was living in England, just renting a place on Mulholland Drive, which the studio paid for. Wonderful view over the city at night in both directions. I lost my train of thought. What was the question?
Oh, about whether your perception of the city has changed over time.
Well, it's got nastier. But anyway, we got fed up with this traveling backwards and forwards. We said, why don't we move here where the work is, where the movies are made, and just give that a try. So we gave up our place in London. We moved here with our kids. And we sort of fell in love with it. But since then, I tried to, well, the terrible thing that happened was that immediately we landed here and made LA our home. The movies moved to Georgia and Bulgaria and everywhere else in the world. But I tried to make different LA movies. For the next 5 or 6 movies I made, they're all set in LA, different facets of LA, not this kind of sweetness, but some of them were really dark, like a film about the Martin trial I made for HBO, like Volcano, The Bodyguard, of course, The Handler, all these pilots for things like Numbers. All the different aspects of the city. So I kind of absorbed them all into this one kind of complicated view of LA, of which LA Story is a part.
It's wonderful. Yeah, I'm glad you brought up your subsequent movies, because it was, looking at your history and the movies that you've made, you seem to be a person who's really not tied to any one genre. So you've gone from this, fairy tale romantic movie to Volcano, like a disaster movie. And then, I watched Threads yesterday because Logan, the executive director of the Frida, he told me, if you're going to talk to Mick Jackson, you better fucking watch Threads before you get up there. So I did. It was just so.
It's not a date movie, like.
No.
No, don't know how to put it. What was the
You,
question
just
again?
about your being your genreless, essentially. You
Well,
switch from
yeah,
project to project. They're all very, very
I
different.
try to present a moving target. I mean, there are some directors who just get linked to a genre, like Jay Roach always does comedies, Carl Reiner always did comedies. Someone like Michael Bay does all these wonderful action movies. And I thought if I don't label myself as a comedy director or whatever, I'll get sent interesting scripts. I don't think Michael Bay gets sent scripts like this.
You wouldn't be able to do them
So
justice, I don't think.
you know, so it was natural for me to go from a comedy like this about LA to The Bodyguard, which is set in the music world of LA and has some dark.
Yeah, but let's talk about The Bodyguard, because something that really struck me with watching LA Story this time was, like you said, just how much the music adds to the experience of watching the film. And The Bodyguard, being, the plot centered in the music world, but then also having, I don't know if you folks know this, The Bodyguard still holds the record for being the #1 selling soundtrack of all time. All time. It is the 3rd best-selling album of all time. #1 being Michael Jackson's Thriller, and #2 being AC/DC's Back in Black. #3 is the Bodyguard soundtrack. So how is music so important to you, and how have you incorporated it into your film?
Obviously, it's a musical. It's not a musical like Singing in the Rain or Pennies from Heaven or whatever. My problem always with musicals, although I enjoyed watching them, is why the characters suddenly stop being actors in a role and sing something. It seemed to kind of, it's convention, I know. Whereas this was about a singer who sings songs. So it's a way of doing a musical. Let the songs comment on the action as you go through it and tell the story of these two people. I mean, there are, sorry.
No, I was going to ask, how much control do you have over the use of music? You said when you drove around with Steve Martin, you were listening to different songs and sort of playing around with that. What's your approach with how you incorporate music into your movies?
I love music. I grew up listening to when I should have been doing my homework as a kid. I was in a back room in the dark and just listening to music on the radio. I listened to European radio stations, and I found I was drawn to listening to opera, particularly things like Wagner, which is about very cinematic subjects like gods and dragons and fire and flames. And I draw quite a lot and paint. I drew storyboards at the age of 11 for how I would shoot these operas in. It didn't work out that way. As I say, you make wrong decisions. I decided to go and study electronics. And then one movie changed my life while I was studying electronics at Southampton in England. The student union, I was watching a film by Ken Russell. Do you remember, anybody remember Ken Russell? Very gifted filmmaker, but kind of very self-indulgent. Well, I saw a very self-indulgent movie. It was about the composer Debussy. And it was about a film crew making a film about Debussy. Oliver Reed played Debussy, and he played the actor who was playing Debussy. And it was, I didn't realize you could do stuff like this. It was an all balls out kind of movie. Go for broke. It was kind of a mix of the shenanigans in the film crew, in the hedonistic sexual revolution of the 1960s, trying to make a film about the sexual revolution and the shenanigans of the 1890s. And the director in the film, Vladek Scheibel, great actor, was always manipulating his actor into shooting this. And at the same time, he was playing Pierre Louis, who was a kind of Svengali-like person who affected and seduced and generally manipulated Debussy. So this sounds kind of boring, but the idea that you could mirror the hedonism of the 60s and the 1890s was new to me. So the next day I called up a film school, one of the earliest ones in Britain, and said, I don't want to be an electronics engineer anymore. I want to direct movies. And they said, well, we haven't had any electronics engineers applying for a postgraduate here. Okay. They took a chance on me. I became a film editor at the BBC very quickly. And I started directing documentaries in about early 60s, mid 60s. What
was your first project as a director?
I think it was a little film insert that went into a live TV program about medicine. I don't know what it was. But anyway, about the 1980s, I started making dramatized films for a science department at the BBC. That's where I landed up because of my degree. And I made Threads. I don't know if any of you are young enough to, old enough to remember this. The 1980s felt very much like now, very dangerous, and anything can happen. And in that small space of years, the Russians invaded a neighboring country, like now. Reagan set in motion the Strategic Defense Initiative, Star Wars. The Russians thought that was a way of preparing to attack the Soviet Union. The Soviets shot down the Korean airline. Everything was very dangerous. At the same time, I was starting on my second marriage. We wanted kids. My wife was actually pregnant with our first daughter. And I thought, this is the world that we're bringing them into. It felt very dangerous, like the Cuban Missile Crisis had many years earlier. So I set out to make something about what would happen if this all went wrong, if there was a nuclear war. Nobody knew anything about this. It's a very little very little known fact, but papers came to light about the secret history of Britain in the late 90s, under the 50-year declassification rule. That Churchill, after the World War II, while he was Prime Minister, had ordered that nobody should say anything about nuclear war. The BBC, which was the only broadcaster then, couldn't make movies about it. They couldn't have discussions about it. And nobody knew anything. And nuclear war is, for me, a threat to my unborn child. It's something that's unthinkable, literally, that people can't think about it because they don't have the pictures in their head that give them any way of thinking about it in an informed way. So I tried to break this kind of ban, and I said, I'm going to make something that is as well researched as I know how. I'll talk to everybody. I'll talk to soldiers and spies and engineers and doctors and whatever about how it would be. And I will tell this truly without holding back at all, as you saw yesterday. It's very uncompromising. It's a mix of, I can't bear to watch this and I can't bear to look away. But it broke that spell, and I'm glad I did it. And my daughter was actually due to be born on the night it went out on British television. She was late, as always in her life. But it was called the night that nobody slept in Britain. I'm glad I made it. And it still seems to be amazingly like LA Story. It has a life to it and it's still there. And if you look at the comments on IMDb or something like that, people are still discovering it and watching it and thinking, oh my God, we can't let this happen again, which was the aim.
Yeah, very effective for that reason. And I think a part of the impact for me was how it was shot as sort of a documentary style as well.
It was the idea of it was not to be able to get a clear picture of what was happening. Anybody seen Threads here?
You can see Threads, yeah. It's on the Criterion channel. If anyone has the Criterion channel, you can stream it.
Anyway, the idea is it's set in the 1980s in Sheffield, which is bang in the middle of Britain. You see a couple in their car overlooking the city, and they're heavy petting, and she gets pregnant. And the rest of the film is how she carries that pregnancy to term. You're telling her parents, telling his parents. And in the middle of that, a nuclear war happens. And you never really leave that circle of her parents and her and the people immediately around them. You don't get a God's eye view of it, as nobody would. You just go through this horrible experience. She gives birth alone in a farmhouse to this child, who then grows up over the next 13 years. And we see the next 13 years of the aftermath of a nuclear war. The child gets raped and then gives birth in the last scene of the film, and you don't see what she gives birth to. You only see her reaction. It's very hard, but it is uncompromising. Everything about it is true. And to their great credit, the BBC, the chief of my channel, sat down and watched it. He had one note at the beginning. He said, I think there's a dip in the middle of that scene. And I got not one single note from them. They said, is this true? I said, yes, it's true. I researched this, all this is true. They said, we'll put it out. So rather dark after you've seen a film like this. I'm sorry. You did ask.
But how does something like that, that's your, your foundation, your first really big project, how does that inform what you do later on as a Hollywood filmmaker?
I'm sort of dragged screaming and kicking, not exactly, but into directing. I didn't push forward, but I got pulled in. Threads made me a name, and therefore I got to do things like work with Tommy Lee Jones on a co-production between BBC and HBO. A Very British Coup, which is something I did afterwards, and Double Helix, The Story of DNA, very different films. A Very British Coup was a kind of political thriller, but they got seen here. Gary Oldman saw A Very British Coup and said, "I want you to do my next movie." I said, "Well, okay." So I did Chattahoochee, which was my first feature film. Dan Melnick and Steve Martin saw Double Helix, and they saw A Very British Coup, and they said, "LA Story." Kevin Costner went to the first screening of LA Story and said, "I think you really know about LA. Would you like to do The Bodyguard?" And yeah, The Bodyguard made me famous for someone who actually was the 6th biggest grossing movie at all time. And then I got Volcano, and I was reunited with Tommy Lee Jones. So it went on. I'm happy to be here, but
well, one thing I noticed when we rewatched The Bodyguard before our conversation, and it's just some really loving nods to the history of cinema in your movie. I never in The Bodyguard I noticed, and this one as well, of course. But one thing I noticed was the house from The Godfather in The Bodyguard, which I hadn't noticed before. Are there any? I
had to fight for that. Larry Kasdan, who was one of the producers, said, "You can't use the same house." I said, "But this is perfect." I talked them into it.
Yeah, good move there for sure.
But you talk about putting things into movies that are references to other things. That was kind of just a nice location. But if in this film, I don't know if you realize it, and it doesn't matter if you don't realize it, but here's the way I think of it. The Medicis in Renaissance Italy, when they wanted to impress someone with a big feast, would serve this thing called a timbalo. It's a kind of upside down pie with a rice crust on the outside of it. And they put in that everything you could possibly think to delight the people at the feast. They put in pigeons and fish and sweetmeats and sugar and fruits, all kinds of things. It doesn't matter if you don't get the references, but this movie, if you don't mind me talking about this for a bit. When it came out, there were some kind of so-so reviews, but Roger Ebert really got it. And he said in his review, "There is so much in this movie. There's so much in this movie. It's like you can pick out this bit and this bit." The opening titles, with the helicopter and the tail of the pup, that's a reference to the start of La Dolce Vita, with the statue of Christ being brought in on the helicopter and the girls in the pool waving to it. The nodding lions when they become children is a nod to the Beauty and the Beast, the Jean Cocteau film. There's lots of Fellini, for example, and Tarkovsky.
I remember we talked about that. I was hoping you would.
I said, there's loads of directors who are referred to in this. It's just layers of the movie. If you just like the love story, it's fine. If you like the social comedy, it's fine. If you want to pick up these references and think, "Oh, that's nice," on the way through, that's fine. It's a timbalo. You take what you want out of it.
Who are some of your favorite filmmakers and who have inspired you?
Tarkovsky, yeah, Tarkovsky. Can anybody guess? Does anybody know? You're a very literate audience, cinema literate audience, I'm told. I'm sure.
Stoker, yeah.
Yeah. He also made The Mirror, in which, and in some of the other movies, the wind suddenly moving through the trees, moving through the forest, is a kind of sense that something momentous is happening, maybe preordained, maybe not, to the characters. And I use that here throughout the movie. It's interesting, there's a lot of, as I was saying, a lot of stuff in this movie that you maybe don't get, but it's a kind of remaking of Midsummer Night's Dream in this forest that I imagine LA to be, a kind of enchanted forest, an enchanted garden where you can become children. As Midsummer Night's Dream is, it's set in a forest, and two couples are in love with the wrong person, and that gets resolved. And you could say the mischievous imp, Puck, is the freeway sign that makes mischief and magic happen. So all these things are in the movie, and it's a glorious mixture. The only problem making the movie was to stop adding stuff to it. The cast were amazing. Everybody added to their scenes, 30-minute lips, Marilu Henner's preparation for the brunch scene, or Rick Moranis in the Gravedigger scene, which is like the scene out of Hamlet, obviously. And that's the worst Cockney accent I've heard since Dick Van Dyke. It's really awful. So we had a screening. Steve knows everybody. Had a screening for all his friends. A lot of comics, like Chevy Chase and Rick were there, and directors like Carl Reiner and Mike Nichols and so on for this screening. And Carl Reiner was just blown away by it. He'd done a lot of movies with Steve, like The Jerk and Man with Two Brains and so on. He said, "This is a piece of art." So, yes, but don't tell anybody. Doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. You put into it all you can to make this richness of it. So I've tried to do that, as I say, in all these different genres.
Yeah, it's great success, I think. So were there any other favorite films that that inspired you?
Yes, some films I've seen recently. I love this year at the Oscars. I thought there was some amazing films. Oppenheimer and Barbie, obviously, but other things like Zone of Interest, I really liked. Poor Things, Perfect Days. Everything practically that was nominated for something I love. And also recently Civil War, that was very, very good. That mirrored for me something, an HBO movie I did about the CNN reporters who were trapped behind enemy lines in the first Gulf War in Baghdad, live from Baghdad. And so the fact this was told through the lens of war correspondents who put their lives on the line for all the stuff that we see on television every night, that struck chords with me. And I love films about LA. As I said, I've made all these films. Recently, I was thinking back to a film called Tangerine. I don't know if anybody saw that.
Tangerine.
Sean Baker. Shot entirely with an iPhone.
Yeah.
Oh, should I have been sounding like this all along? Oh, Mike. No, I love films that go for broke. And I think my favorite LA films are always things that are populated by a lot of differentiated characters like Magnolia, like Chinatown. I actually wore the wrong T-shirt tonight. There was a festival at the American Cinematheque recently called Bleak Week, the cinema of despair. Chinatown was on the back of the T-shirt, and Threads was on the back of the T-shirt too. Really depressing films. No, but I like the neo-noir films like Collateral and Chinatown and what else? I'm still hovering around the number 6 in the middle.
Yeah. There's some great LA movies. My favorite would be probably Mulholland Drive.
Yeah.
One of my favorite LA movies. There's so many good ones. Sunset Boulevard, wonderful LA movie.
Yeah.
I think a lot of the really good LA movies have that sort of peek into show business.
Yeah, a lot of them do, and a lot of them also have this kind of neo-noir quality to them. I tried to make a neo-noir comedy with Dana Carvey. It's called Clean Slate, about an amnesiac private eye, and shot it in LA. It was one of my LA films. I didn't do well because it was at the point it was for MGM. The management of MGM was shifting from Alan Ladd Jr. to the new guys, so we kind of lost it in the publicity. But interesting to try making a movie that is about LA. Well, no, I was going to go somewhere I don't want to go. Interestingly, Christopher Nolan saw the movie. Nothing happened to the movie.
Are you telling me this is how Memento came about?
Yes.
No way.
Yes. Apparently, he saw Memento. He saw the Clean Slate. Whether he laughed at it or not, I don't know. But the idea of Memento came from that.
Incredible. Wow.
That's the business. I don't know. You can't plan it. I got dragged, as I say, into this by actors that I'd worked with, or actors, who saw something and thought I might bring something to them, to the movie, who prodded someone and said, let's give them a shot at this.
Well, incredible. I think we're all very grateful that you were dragged kicking and screaming into this illustrious career. I'd like to take a moment and get some questions from the audience. If audience members have any questions for Mick, I'll give this to you.
Somebody in the middle there?
There's like 5 people who have money. Um, Hello. I was just kind of curious. You had talked about a lot of the different layers in the film that, it was nods at different directors and movies and art, and how much of that, and that's very noticeable. I've been watching this movie at least every other month since I was 10 years old. It's one of my favorites. Anytime I'm not feeling well, this is the first thing that goes on. And I've learned so much from it. What was that kind of a collaborative effort between you and Steve, or was it written
Every
into the
movie,
script? And
whatever anybody tells you, every movie depends on upwards of Volcano. I had 2,000 people on the set on a night when we were doing big scenes. Every one of those contributed to the movie. I made it a point, after every day, to be the last person on set and to go and personally thank everybody in the grip truck, in the electric truck. So everybody makes a movie. When you get a movie like this, in which everybody, like Rick Moranis in the Gravedigger scene and Mary Lou Henner, everybody adds a line or something, and you create this thing as you go along. Steve worked 7 years with Dan Melnick, his producer, on this script before I even got involved. I worked with him a little bit. He has these, as we came up to the movie, these rules about comedy, like comedy plays better in a cold theater. I don't know. And also, you put 12 more gags into a comedy than there's room for. We put a lot more than 12 gags into this. You don't know what they are until you run the movie with an audience. You don't know which one's working. You don't know which one's just fall with a clunk on the floor. We had so much material in this movie, we couldn't stop adding this stuff. And if anybody's seen a DVD with added things in it, you'll know about the scenes that were dropped, like John Lithgow playing a Mike Ovitz kind of super agent who arrives to a meeting in a jetpack, which he takes off and gives to the valet. You can't kind of pick at it. You have to take a whole chunk of the story and throw it away, essentially, in the good of the movie, for the good of the movie. There was a kind of parallel scene also with the boxer, the aspiring boxer who lives next door, he and his girlfriend, and he's always going to try for the big time. And there's a kind of running commentary on how Steve and Victoria are going in their relationship. Why is this guy's story so much more interesting than mine? That came out too. The things the earthquake scene, I had a sight gag. Angeline, I had this kind of on-off relationship with Angeline. The first sign of the earthquake was that her bosom started to move. We had to drop that for length, but I got her in Volcano. The falling sign that's on fire is Angeline Billboard, so for which she had a stunt double.
All right, we have a next question from Matt from Studio City.
Drove all the way here for this. Took like 2 hours, but so this has been my favorite movie since I was like 10 or 12 years old. And it's crazy to watch it and realize how much of it is like in my DNA. But I had a question about the editing.
Yep.
One of the reasons I think it holds up so well is because it feels so modern, like it's so quick and fast. And I was wondering what about the material made you feel like you had to shoot it like an action movie? Because it really, with the long lenses and the quick cutting, it really feels modern, even though the clothes and everything is kind of dated.
That's good to hear. That's good to hear. When I'm seeing an old movie of mine that I haven't seen for a long time, being an ex-editor, I go and cut. And it's amazing the number of times that actually is in sync. My fingers are in sync with the cut. Sometimes it's not. The pace of movies has got quicker and quicker and quicker with MTV and everything like that, music videos. But this movie was made for an earlier kind of more relaxed time, before there was an internet, before there were cell phones, before there were memes and tropes. This is all based on Steve Martin's wonderful perception. He has an ear and an eye open for all these things. He's a true Renaissance man. He's a banjo player. He's a playwright. He's a dramatist, a collector of art, and a stand-up comic, a wild and crazy guy. There also, I think, so many styles of comedy in this movie, which was a real buzz for me. That you have physical comedy, and you have verbal comedy, and you have one-liners, and you have puns taken literally, like Monty Python. And you have this graceful comic who can do this business where he sets up the first date with Sarah, and she drives off, and he throws his hat in the air and catches it. That's pure Chaplin. Nobody can do all that except him, and I'm just forever in his debt for letting me do this movie. But you ask about doing an action movie, so sorry to wander away from your point. I think I always like to set myself a challenge and do something that is really, really difficult because I haven't done it before. And I think that creates a kind of surge of adrenaline. That is, in my case, a spur to creativity. Sheer terror is a way of getting the best out of yourself. I don't know if I can do this, but I really do want to. I think that's interesting because there's always as I gather from talking to actors, there's a point where they're reading a script where they decide whether they're going to take this movie or not. And it's not the entire story. It's just one scene or even one line or one word or a stage direction that says, to them at least, this is my key into the movie. That's happened to me in movie after movie after movie. There's a challenge there. Can I do this? And have I done this before? If not, why not do it now? So I try to follow that line, to go from political thrillers to spy movies to whatever. It's paid off so far.
Okay, we have Deborah from Santa Clarita next. She asks.
Hi, over here. I was curious, what are some of your personal favorite references and jokes in the movie?
Right.
Favorite references and jokes.
It's so hard to, having just watched it. I'm just running the movie in my head backwards and forwards. That was Steve. Oh, here's the great thing about working with Steve. He's not like the late Robin Williams, for whom one person is an audience, so he was always on. Steve is wild and crazy guy when he needs to be wild and crazy guy. He's sensitive guy when he needs to be that. And off camera, he's the most delightful, charming, slightly shy, withdrawn person. And that gets kind of thrown away when the camera's rolling. I love working with him. I loved the collaboration that happened. The scene where the car starts moving on its own, and they're taken to the freeway sign. We shot it all out of sequence, as you do in a movie. So we shot them on different days, and we realized when we got halfway through the movie that there was a mismatch, that in the scene where the car's moving, he gets in the driver's seat. And when they arrive, he's the other way around, or whichever way around it was. So I talked about this with Steve, and he said, I have an idea. We set up a camera on the back of the car, and I'll say, here, let me not drive. And worked perfectly.
Okay, Mick, we have Mike from Anaheim over here.
Hi, Mick. First off, I want to say I saw Threads as an 8-year-old in 1984.
I'm sorry.
And I watched a lot of horror movies, but that film got into my psyche as a young child in a way that no other film ever has. And I can't stop thinking about it to this day. And I recently watched it, and it still holds a lot of that same heaviness. What my question was, with a film such as LA Story in comparison to Threads, as well as a lot of the other films you have, is there 2 or 3 films that you've made that you want to be most remembered for as far as a legacy as a director?
I don't think in terms of legacy, that's a kind of
You got a long ways to go, but
curiosity to it. Threads, obviously, I'm glad I made that, and I stand by every frame of it. Temple Grounded, the movie I did with Claire Danes on HBO. That's a hard sell. If you're trying to sell a movie about a woman who's autistic, whose dream in life is to design safer slaughterhouses, it's not an obvious pitch for a movie. But I realized immediately, this is what I say about the moment when, if you're an actor, you see the line in the script that says, I can do this. I'll build everything around from that. She thinks in pictures. She's a real person, Temple Grandin. I love her very dearly. She thinks in pictures, and she is an autistic woman. And I thought, as she described the way that the world impinges on her, how things sound louder to her than anything else, smells are smellier to her. The images come and sort of knock her over backwards. I realized that she experiences the world in the way that someone sitting in the front row of a surround sound theater with IMAX does. And that was my key into the movie. I would shoot it from her point of view and make everything, you know, with all the fast cutting techniques, her association of things in her head, and the loudness of the sounds, even tiny sounds that are like a howl round or acoustic feedback in a microphone, to put it in your face so you understood it, and to try and do that with grace and humor too, so that it's actually quite moving, I think. And Claire Danes was just wonderful. We had a screening for Temple after the film was complete, in a screening room with some executives from HBO. And everybody was watching her. She was just quiet and just glued to the screen. Anybody seen the movie, Temple Grandin? There's a scene where she's explained to David Strathairn that any single word just kind of triggers off a whole series of visual associations. It's not just one word. And she reels them off, and it's a close cutting sequence. Anyway, we watched her watching the movie. The lights went up at the end, the credits rolled, and everybody's looking with her, and she doesn't looking at her, and she doesn't say anything, and everybody's getting rather nervous, like me. And I said to her, Temple, what's your reaction? She said, oh, it's great. It's terrific. I love that scene where you did so and so, and then the camera moves back here, and then you cut to this. And she had memorized the entire movie in her head and could run backwards and forwards like running on an editing machine. And I realized, well, this was the right thing to do. And the great thing about that movie, and you don't normally get feedback like this, which is wonderful, from the audience in movie theaters all over the world. But I have been approached after screenings for that movie, Temple Grandin, by parents who have said, thank you. I never understood what my child was experiencing until this moment. And I can now love them and be part of their experience and try and... That's the best thing you can hope for.
All right, Mick, we have Kyle from Los Angeles.
Thank you very much. I join the legions of people in here for whom this is their favorite movie. I have a question. It's granular. It's about one scene that's fascinated me for a couple of decades. It's when Steve Martin says, life is a tale told by an idiot, full of sound and fury, signifying nothing. And it hits a poetic, almost haunting note there. And the way it's shot makes it feel like it was planned to hit that emotional chord. But then the way it's edited, the second shot to the cat looks like a still maybe. It feels like you found it in editing. It's a really effective moment. I wanted to know if that was something you planned or if it's something you found or...
No.
No?
No, the cat wouldn't cooperate. It is a still of the cat. I cringe every time I see it in the movie. I hope that answers your question.
All right, we have Ken from Atwater Village. See if you can make everybody laugh as well.
That's a lot of pressure. My question is regarding genre and your career. Did you ever revisit any genre, or was it always new? And I kind of want to add, saying that this film has what did you say? It was a phrase like harmless bone in its body, or a mean bone in its body. That is such a beautiful way to describe this film, and I wonder if you ever wanted to make another film that doesn't have a mean bone in its body.
It's hard in this present climate, I think, to make, it would be hard to make a film like LA Story again. I can think of all sorts of things that we would have put in addition in the timbala of this, but No, I think as you age in the business, as you get different scripts, you just discover different things in yourself, different movies that you would like to make, and then are not always feel good, warm movies like this. They're kind of harsh underbelly movies. I've done a lot of that in TV pilots in LA. So that's the kind of balancing LA to this. I've done a couple of comedies. I have done, I think, probably the worst movie ever made and the least funny comedy ever made, which is something just about the time of the .com boom. Silicon Valley was just getting started, and it was a film called The First 20 Million is Always the Hardest. It was about people who made their fortunes and the kind of craziness of the lifestyle and the seminars and incubators and everything. And it landed at Fox, and I had a beautiful script, which is very funny, by Gary Tisch, and wanted to shoot it. But it was satirical in some of the ways that LA Story is satirical. And the studio said, satire is what dies on Saturday night. And that was the start of 3 years of development hell, in which you have to face every day the decision, do I go ahead with this, which is becoming less and less the movie I want to make and less funny, given that I've invested so much of my time and they might give me a green light tomorrow. And they gave me a green light eventually. And it was dragged screaming and kicking. I keep wanting to say clicking. It bombed as it deserved to. It was awful, awful. I think 6 people saw it. You probably can't even get it on streaming. But it wasn't funny anymore. You have to go while the iron is hot, and has taught me to beware of the development process that actually squeezes any goodness out of a movie. Now, in between that and LA Story, I did the Dana Carvey movie, allegedly the source of Memento, and really enjoyed that. It was a beautiful, funny script by Robert King and his wife, Michelle, the Kings who did The Good Wife and have now a career in television doing wonderfully. Very funny.
All right, Mick, we have some more people that drove out here for you. We have some more people from LA. We've got Deandra and Jazzy. They've got a question for you.
Hi, thank you.
See you.
So first I want to say, again, with everybody in the room, I've been watching this for a long time. I'm in my 50s now. And this is my daughter who also loves the movie. She brought me here for Mother's Day. And I want you to know that maybe, even though you didn't write the script, I want you to know that I do a lot of these things from the movie for my whole life. And I didn't realize that this is what I do. So I don't do 30-minute lips, but I do, before I walk out of the house, I look at the mirror and I turn. And if I see something, I take it off. This is how I get dressed to go out.
You should be in my next movie.
And then I also realized that I am a spinner and a twirler on the beach. I also do it in my house. I have a friend named Sandy, and I literally spell her name big S, little A, little N.
I have to tell you about this. Sarah Jessica Parker was just such a wonderful experience for me.
So it's made it's a big impact in my life. So my only question is, and you kind of touched on it just now with your previous answer, but would we do this again? Would we reboot it, recast new people? We can't do it, right?
Don't go back. That's my motto. Don't go back.
Yeah, and it's a great class.
Can I just say something about Sarah Jessica Parker? This was her breakthrough, this movie. She had been a child actress, and very, very brilliant casting director, Mindy Marin, said, why don't you get this young girl in for a chemistry read with Steve? And she came in very shy, and they read that scene where she spells her name, big S, little a, and the chemistry was electric between them. And I said, you've got this, you've nailed this. I will only give you one direction in this movie. Use all her airhead energy physically. So don't go into a room and sit on the bed, dive on the bed. Don't go with him, leap into his arms, leap on his back, go in through the window in order to get in the car, twirl, bounce, bounce, bounce. And that's the only direction I ever had to give her. She just saw this, and as you know, she's done quite well.
Oh, I just wanted to ask, you said this was a collaborative effort where everybody was adding something to the script or adding something during filming that was their own contribution. What were your contributions?
I said action and cut. Yeah. Well, all kinds of, the way the thing is staged is very much in the director's hands. That's not necessarily in the stage directions in the script. So the feeling of the movie, the visual feeling of the movie, the references to in Ariel, his friend next door's house. It's a kind of Cézanne kind of mural. There are these when he's roller skating in LACMA and goes past a bust, a torso, and in that cut, it's a different torso looking the other direction. That's from Battleship Potemkin, Eisenstein. Just little things like that. There was one shot I wanted to get in the opening title montage where in slow motion, oranges fall from a tree, like orange rain, and bounce. We could never get the mechanisms that released all the oranges to work in the right sequence, so that didn't.
All right, last question we have from Robert from Santa Ana.
Hi. I concede all the comedy was terrific. But I'm 69 and I still tear up from the quote love scenes and the emotional scenes that come every time. And Steve and Victoria were very early on in their relationship when he did this. And I want to know, when you were dealing with Steve and doing this and writing LA, and when you were directing this, obviously directing comedy and directing those scenes are a lot different. And when he was talking to you and you were blocking out those scenes, how was that done? And how was their relationship between he and Victoria, since they had their own personal relationship going on when you were putting this all together?
It's to say the obvious maybe, but this is a double love story. It's a double love letter. One is to LA, obviously, and the other is to his wife at the time, Victoria. So they brought that personal story to it, but adding to it. When they're on the beach and they're having the argument, and he says to her, you know, I would call in storms so your plane couldn't take off and change the polarity of the earth and so on. The way I shot it is that they're in this intense thing, but all around them, the enemies of that moment between them are doing their own thing. She's twirling in the surf and he's running down the steps with the sweater. It just adds another sense of them being in something that's important, like the wind, like the Tarkovsky.
Big round of applause for Mick Jackson. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.